Yeah, Spency boy back at it again, dudes. Terrain deformation. Okay, this is always a fun little subject to talk about with these milestone games. This is always a little bit of an interesting... Holy big hoss outside, oh my god. Big dog getting down the road, okay? This is always a really interesting sort of element to these motocross games, and I just can't figure it out. I can't figure it out with the milestone games. I don't know what they're doing. I just don't understand it. It's like you literally had more terrain deformation in MXGP 3 than you did in MXGP 2020. Like, somebody please explain that to me. In what dimension, in what Spencer Turley Galaxy Boy Planet Dimension universe can that even be a possibility? Like, I genuinely don't understand it. I really don't. By the way, you boys should definitely go add me up on Snapchat, follow me on Instagram. All of my social media is just Spencer Turley, no spaces and no capital letters. I'll add you boys back up. But yeah, just like, what? Somebody explain it. I just don't understand it. And we've seen this new gameplay with MXGP 2021, and like, even if there is some terrain deformation in MXGP 2021, even though I don't think there's going to be any kind of really like blow your mind terrain deformation or anything more than MXGP 3, you know what I mean? It's not going to be anything like that, I don't think. Of course, they could throw a curveball in there and, you know, try to prove everybody wrong, like, hey, we actually have terrain deformation in it, look at that. I don't know if that's going to happen. I highly doubt it, because they've not really had a terrain deformation system in their game for a colder than a witch's titty minute now, okay? So, you know, odds are they're probably not going to have much of a terrain deformation system. But it's just so weird to me how you can have it to the level that you had it on MXGP 3, and then it's as if it's not just that they've kept that same level of terrain deformation, they've literally went backwards. They've literally toned it back. They've literally done less and less and less terrain deformation, it seems like, since MXGP 3. I mean, you can definitely let me know down in the comments if one of you guys has solved the puzzle to the milestone terrain deformation mystery out here, because I can't understand it. I just can't. I can't fathom why they're doing that. Why? I mean, of course, obviously, they're coming out with 300,000 games a year, so, you know, that could be playing somewhat of an element, you know, like it's just easier to not really have that much of a terrain deformation system in it. It's easier to probably develop a game that doesn't really have that whole, you know, side to the game. That could be part of it. I'm not really sure, but yeah, I saw some of those YouTubers' early gameplays of MXGP 2021 that cracked me up, because they were saying stuff like, well, I can't really tell if that was a pre-made rut or a terrain deformed rut. That's how you know it's not good. That if you can't really tell if it's, well, was that rut there before, or did that get developed, right? Was that terrain deformation, or was that already there? Was that Milestone's little bullshit look like there's ruts, but there's not actually ruts, or is that the actual terrain deformation that did that, right? I literally heard those YouTubers playing MXGP 2021 say that kind of shit. I heard it. So I already know it's going to be so light to a point where it's going to be that, well, was that really the terrain deformation that did that? Or was it not really the terrain? You know what I'm saying? So, seems like we're in the same boat here with MXGP 2021. And I just don't get it. Like, could you imagine if they would have took the terrain deformation system from Reflex and just continued to build on that, right? It really is one of the biggest tragedies in motocross gaming history, the fact that everything seemed to change after Reflex came out. It's like we got the greatest of the greatest great that you could possibly have, okay? And then everything changed over there at MX vs. ATV, like Rainbow split, and then it was THQ Nordic, and then they didn't have access to all the Reflex code or whatever the story was behind all that. So then, Alive wasn't quite what Reflex was, and then the games after Alive were certainly not what Reflex was, and I still feel like we've just not gotten back to that terrain deformation feeling of Reflex. Fuck talking about getting one that was better than Reflex. I feel like we still haven't even gotten back to the point of where Reflex was. That game that came out like back when some of you boys weren't even born yet, that game. That's kind of funny, isn't it? Holy crap. Like, what the hell are these motocross companies doing? I mean, yeah, MX vs. ATV has started to try to get back down that road, and I do have to give them some credit with what they did with All Out. When it first came out, it wasn't anything to call home about as far as terrain deformation, but then they went in there and started updating it through the different updates with All Out, and it did get better, but I still don't think we're to any sort of Reflex level, and Milestone's even further behind, MX vs. ATV All Out. I mean, way further behind, so it's just like, what, are we ever going to get a proper terrain deformation system in a Milestone game? You boys talk about how the graphics look so good, and oh man, look at all this shit with these Milestone games. Meanwhile, it's literally a facade. There is no actual real solid terrain deformation in the game, period. Okay? Certainly not in MXGP 2020. I mean, it literally, when I say there was none in MXGP 2020, I'm telling you, it was so low that you could have considered MXGP 2020 not even having a terrain deformation system in it at all. Like, I just feel like we're so far behind what it should be, not just in the Milestone games, but just in all motocross games in general. We're so far behind. That's what I'm saying. Like, could you imagine if they just continued, the same people that worked on Reflex and the success of that game and everything, and they just continued it the next game and the next game after that and the next game? Could you fucking imagine where the terrain deformation system would be at this point if it was like Reflexes but developed even more and then advanced even more into these next generation consoles and all this stuff? Oh my God, bro. Whoo! That would be like a whole nother stratosphere of experiencing motocross gaming, right? Everybody wants to talk about these Milestone games being so good graphics, and look at that on these next-gen consoles. Milestone's really doing it out here, right? And I find it to be so hilarious because really when you talk about the physical sense and the gameplay and the actual gameplay features that should be in a AAA motocross game in 2021, Milestone's not even close. They're not even close. Yeah, they have the graphics, but they don't have anything else. So what's your point? Yeah, it's eye candy, but you literally have basically no terrain deformation system. The physics are not even close to where they was in Reflex as far as just overall development, skill gap, replayability, different kind of whips, creating your own style, all this kind of stuff. There's none of that in the Milestone games. It's just not there, man. It's just not there. But like, I just imagine this day and age in this world where, you finally do get a terrain deformation system in one of these games that's like Reflex, but 2 or 3 times better than that, if you can even imagine that. That's where we should be in 2021 motocross gaming, but unfortunately we're not. But could you imagine the how realistic the deformation on the jump faces and how it would realistically kind of cup out the jump faces and create actual solid pre-made braking bumps? I said pre-made. I didn't mean to say that. What I'm trying to say here is, like, the deformation can create braking bumps that are to the level of what pre-made braking bumps are in a game like MX Simulator and stuff like that. Could you imagine if there was actually a terrain deformation system that you literally could start from perfectly smooth, no character, no ruts, no nothing, and it could totally develop the entire track, actual pre-made roughness, solid pre-made braking bumps, acceleration bumps, micro ruts in the corner, big ruts in some corner, big berms, it could create all that. Ruts on the jump face, lowering the jump faces all that kind of stuff. Could you imagine if a terrain deformation system could actually do all that and have a cushiony feeling and create totally different kinds of deformation depending on what kind of dirt compound you're on? Like sand's going to make more of that soft, blowed out style, deformation. Then you get on a hard pack track and it makes these blue grooved MX Simulator Erode-esque, kind of ruts in it where they get really, really choppy and shit, right? And then you go to like a brownie mix style dirt track and it's like a combination of those two things. So it's got some softness to it, but then also some, sturdiness to it. That's where we should be today in modern motocross gaming with terrain deformation. Just letting you know. That's where we should be with how good Reflex was more than a decade ago. But we're not even close to that. Milestone, it's like, dog, they couldn't even develop that good of a terrain deformation, even if they did take 2 or 3 years of a break with coming out with games. I swear to God, they still wouldn't be able to do it. It's going to take, like, one of these motocross companies literally sitting there for, like, 5 years straight, developing this sort of a system, and then coming out with a game, and then that's what you would have. But I just don't know if any of them's going to take the time. Any of them's going to, really care enough about it to do that. But that's the future of motocross games, man. It really is. But we're not there at all. And the Milestone games seem to not care at all about any of that at this point. It's really sad, man. So anyways, I'm going to cut this video off here. Disappointing that we're not going to see much of that in MXGP 2021. It's like Milestone's just toying with it, It's like, well, we'll throw it in a little bit in the Supercross game. So, yeah, that doesn't really even do anything physically on the track. It just kind of looks like there's terrain deformation happening on the track. You literally have to basically go all the way back to MXGP 3 to get any sort of real physical, deformed rut. And even still, with MXGP 3, that ain't even fucking close to Reflex. That ain't even close. So you see how we're still like, we're complete universes away from being where we need to be. Certainly at the rate that we're going, we're not going to be there for another 10 years, it looks like, in motocross gaming. So it's really sad to see it. Of course, you always get the haters, the little troll boys that got to say, well, Spence, if it was so easy to develop a game like that, why don't you just do it? Oh, yeah, because I'm literally living in one of these, motocross gaming studios, and I can just sit here and whip this shit up real quick. Like, dog, I'm one person giving an opinion, okay? There's a complete difference in me giving my opinion over here when I'm not even a game developer, okay? Even though I could be a really good asset to certain individuals that are game developers. I could talk them through what they need to do and how to do it and things like that, but actually doing it, could I do it? Yeah, but it would take some time sitting down with the actual, gaming development program, whatever it is that they use to develop all this shit and come up with all these features and stuff like that. I would have to learn how to do that, but I could definitely tackle it, but again, I'm not a game developer. I'm just a guy giving an opinion out here. So, and comparing me to what they're doing with these Milestone games as far as terrain deformation is not really saying much because they're doing nothing with it. So, not really sure what the point would be with that, but my whole point is, if they could do what they did in Reflex back in 2008, like, what the hell we doing nowadays in 2021? You see what I'm saying? That's really more of my point here. It's like, if that was capable then, we should be 2 or 3 times that by now, and in fact, we're 2 or 3 times the opposite direction nowadays. We're 2 or 3 times worse than Reflex was, instead of 2 or 3 times better than what Reflex was. You see what I'm saying? That's the whole problem we're running into now. Oh, man. I'll admit it. You ain't been the man for like a minute. And I told you that I'm in it for the long haul.